Hi there, I'm Bryn Williams and welcome to the Cook-Along. This course is going to be a pudding of batter-breath, rhubarb and double cream. So again, preparation is key for cooking in a professional kitchen or at home. So preparation is the first thing we need to do. So the first thing on this recipe is make the stock syrup. Stock syrup is equal quantities of sugar and water. In this case, we're going to do 300 sugar, 300 water. So we're just going to weigh in the sugar. It seems a lot of sugar, but it is a dessert, and we are cooking with rhubarb. Rhubarb can be quite sour, but this way of cooking rhubarb in a stock syrup, you always get a consistency through every single bit of rhubarb. And sometimes when you cook rhubarb, you're constantly adding sugar as you go along, and then it just breaks down. This is a really, really good technique of cooking the rhubarb. So 300 grams of sugar, 300 grams of water, and then we're going to add 1 bay leaf, a clove stick and a cardamom pod. So the importance of this now, as you can see, the sugar's sunk to the bottom. So it's very, very important that we keep this moving or make sure the sugar doesn't stick to the bottom and turn to caramel before it melts. So on a high heat, whisk in hand, and we're just going to whisk the liquid just to make sure the sugar doesn't stick to the bottom. After about a minute or so, it starts to dissolve, and then it's important that we leave it to come to the boil. And it must come to the boil. Very, very important. If it doesn't come to the boil, you don't dissolve the sugar, and you'll have a completely different flavour to your stock syrup. Okay, so the stock syrup's come to the boil, which is very, very important. So all the sugar's been dissolved, the water comes to the boil, the sugar's dissolved. We just take it to the side. We just want it to simmer. And that's it. While that's ticking over, we go back to the rhubarb. That's the first thing we want to cook. So we've got nice, thin bits of rhubarb. We're going to cut the rhubarb about 3 inches long on a little bit of a bias or a diagonal cut. And really we cut everything the same size, for the reason being, if you cut it the same size, it will cook the same time. If you tend to cut something this size and a bit different, they will cook at different times. So that's why a lot of chefs, like myself, always try to pick things out the same size, just so it cooks the same time. So we're going to add the rhubarb to the stock syrup. And that's it. Just let that simmer away. We don't want it boil and reduce, because if you keep on boiling the stock syrup, what will happen is it will become too sweet. You lose all the water. So simmering is fine, boiling not. That'll take 3-4 minutes. I quite like my rhubarb, what we call a little bit of a crunch to it. I don't like it too soft. So that'll take 3 or 4 minutes. Next step is we're going to whip the double cream. Now, we can whip the double cream in advance, but what we'll take it to a semi-whip or a soft whip. So in with the double cream. That's enough. Now we're just going to whisk to a soft peak. You can use a machine, but as always, use a machine or a hand blender or always over whisk. So cream, I always tend to do it by hand. Yeah, it takes 2 or 3 minutes. but at least you know the consistencies of the cream. Don't be too hasty, stick it in the machine and just over whips. You can see the cream is, you know, getting thicker as we go along. So we'll just get you see now it's just starting to thicken up, and have it 90% where you want it, and you can always just put a whisk in it right to the last minute before you need to serve. So that is fine. I can see it's just holding on the whisk is what we want. So don't over whip the cream. Cream's ready. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to create what we call like a custard mix, really, for the bara brith. So we're going to cook the bara brith in like an egg mix. So we got a little bit of double cream, just a little bit of milk, one whole egg, good pinch of sugar. So this is all the ingredients that you would make a custard with. So really, we're going to dip the bread in a custard mix, and that's the eggy bread part of this. So whisk it all together. That now it is ready. So the last bit, and the most important bit, is the bara brith. Now, in Wales we have quite a regional bit of cooking here. So in Wales we have two types of bara brith. One is a bread version of bara brith made with yeast, and one is made with baking powder, which is more of a cake or a tea loaf. So doing this recipe, it's very important that we use the one with yeast in, because it's more like a bread. If you use the one with a baking powder, which is more of a cake, it will just tend to fall apart. So this is a North Wales version of a bara brith. Now, if your bara brith gets a little bit 2-3 days old, which never does in my house, is always gone before it gets to that stage, it's always better for this recipe the bread is not super fresh, because we're going to stick the bread in the egg mixture, then we're going to pan fry it in some butter. So if the bread is super fresh, it tends to fall apart. So a little bit of 2-3 day old bread is good if you can actually let the bread go that old, which, as I said, in my house it never does. Okay, so we'll take a thin tray, add the mix, you can add the bara brith to the egg mix. I'm going to leave that now for about a minute on each side. We want the bread to absorb the mixture. What we don't want is just a little bit of egg mix on top and bottom. The bread needs to absorb the mix. You can see there it's not quite absorbed, so it's very important that the bread does absorb the mix. While that's soaking, I've just got a large non-stick pan on the heat with the rhubarb next to it. Keep turning the bread over. That's alright. So we're just going to add a knob of butter to the pan. We just want the butter just to start melting and starting to foam, what we call foaming butter. Now, when you cook with different types of butter, there's brown butter, nut brown butter, beurre noisette, as they say in French. we don't want the butter to turn colour until the bread is in the frying pan. It will obviously start to change colour as we cook the eggy bread, which is fine, but we don't want the butter to turn a nut brown before the bread goes in. So let the butter melt. Keep turning the bread. I just want the butter just to start foaming, just to start boiling, but not changing colour, which is very important. Because the eggs in the mixture, the sugar's in there. If the butter's too cold, you won't get that caramelisation on the bread. We want that caramelisation. We want the sugar to caramelise. We want the batter brie to start to caramelise, because in batter brie there's raisins, sultanas, orange peel. There's soaked in tea. There's loads of flavours in it. There's allspice. There's mixed spice. So you want that bread to touch that warm butter and start to cook, not to start to absorb the butter. About 30 seconds off. Okay, so the Welsh butter is melted, and you can see the quality of the butter. Not too much whey in it, it's just pure butter. So we're going to add the batter brie in. Nice hot frying pan. Now we're just going to cook the batter brie or the eggy bread in the butter. Now the bread's already cooked, we're just going to cook the egg mixture. That's all we have to do. So don't think it needs to be there too long, but at the same time it needs to be there long enough to cook the egg mix. We'll just leave that. That'll take 2 minutes on each side. That's nearly ready. So a nice brown caramelised colour. There's nothing worse than pan frying something and no colour. If you're going to fry it in a pan, you've got to have that colour. You see there, a nice golden brown. Turn it over. I'm just going to pour some of the butter over the batter brie. Just keep it nice and moist. We can use, because we're pan frying this in butter, before we serve the batter brie, we're just going to put it onto some kitchen paper. Just lose any excess butter. Pat it dry. You can put this through the oven if we really want to. You could seal it a little bit thicker, a couple of minutes each side, and just place it in the oven just to keep warm if you're cooking it for 3 or 4 people. So we're going to put this straight on a plate. I'm just going to take the rhubarb out. Again, just place it on the kitchen paper. Batter brie on the plate. The smells of this, you can smell the spices coming through. Beautiful. Just going to add the rhubarb to the side. And now, just to finish off, quick whisk. That's ready. Now we're using a warm spoon. Shape the cream. And that is it. That is my pan-fried batter breath, rhubarb and double cream. Perfect for St David's Day. Mwynhewch. Dydd Gwyl Dewi.